What's up, mamas? For this segment, we have Lauren Pace. She's an author, a health coach, and a mom, and we're going to be talking about helping kids handle their frustration proactively. Lauren, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be part of the mom conference this year.
I know, it's going to be awesome. We're excited to pick your brain a little bit here. So let's start off with, how many kids do you have?
So I have 2, one on the way. I'm pretty sure that I will have the baby when this goes live. So I'll have 3.
Oh my goodness. How many weeks along are you?
I'm 35 weeks.
Oh yeah, you definitely will. Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So you are a coach. So it says you're a health coach and a mom and an
I'm
author.
a behavior coach.
Okay.
Or so.
Okay. So what made you want to become
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I help parents understand their kids' challenging behavior, and instead of just seeing the behavior as something we need to change or stop, helping to support our kids with the skills that they need so they can still communicate their needs, but just not doing those behaviors that we don't like.
Okay. I love that. That's a skill that every mom needs, I feel like.
Right.
So what made you want to get into that?
So I was a preschool teacher for about 7 years, and I had just a really, really challenging class one year and started to study something called positive behavior support. And while I was studying positive behavior support, there was a child who was strangling kids with a rope that he'd find, or not that I had ropes laying around, but strings and stabbing kids with pencils. And it just seemed kind of like psychopath behavior. I'm like, what do? I don't know. Anyways, what we realized is he was trying to get the attention of his peers, and he was trying to engage, and he didn't know how to do that appropriately. And so once we helped him learn those skills, he was able to be successful in our classroom, and all of those behaviors went away. So I was actually 38 weeks pregnant with my son, and I enrolled in grad school and just started the journey of learning more about behavior.
Wow, good for you. That's awesome. So what are some of the first steps? So if a parent recognizes those types of behaviors in their own children, what are some of the first steps they need to take to help them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So something that I always say is stay curious about the behavior. So instead of assuming that they're hitting because of this, or they're biting because of this, or when they bite, I need to do this, we need to figure out why they're biting. Because if they're biting because they want a reaction from you, then maybe our response is going to reinforce that. But if they're biting because they have an oral sensory need, then no matter how you respond, it's not going to ever get that need met because they're not getting that oral stimulation unless they bite. And so if we can stay curious about the behavior and be like, okay, they are hitting because they're having a hard time knowing how to communicate that it's still their turn or something. So then you can then go to the skill that's missing and teach it proactively. And so that behavior goes away instead of morphing into just something different.
Okay. Is there a certain age that this usually starts to happen, that you see it more?
Toddlers.
Yeah.
So it starts at toddlers and it goes all the way through. I mean, I could use the same type of strategy to figure out adult behavior, where you're just okay, seems like they're acting out because they're feeling this, our emotions kind of contribute to that behavior a lot. Let's see, age 17 months to age 36 months is the peak of aggression for kids. So you're going to see it so much more in that age because they're starting to have more needs, want more independence, but not be able to communicate it as well. And so that's when you're really going to see kids who are having difficult behaviors, screaming, hitting, biting, aggressive behaviors, sometimes just kind of shutting down. It's going to look different for every kid, but this is where you can start to really teach some of those social and emotional skills.
Because that can become extremely frustrating for parents as well, to know how to deal with that. Especially because, like you mentioned, some of these kids, they don't know how to express themselves, or they can't necessarily tell you. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult. So what tips do you have for parents to be able to help themselves, their children, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's what I do is kind of just on my social media and on everything, I just kind of talk about just different strategies, and it's going to look different for each kid. And I think that's part of it, is understanding that there's not a protocol. If your kid bites, there's not a set thing that you do. So the first thing is just to really figure out why your child is doing what they're doing. And you do this by kind of observing their patterns. So For example, do you have like, you have kids, right?
I do. I have an almost 2-year-old and a 1-month-old.
Okay. So your almost 2-year-old,
Yep.
what is like one behavior that's really hard that comes up?
Screaming incessantly.
Oh my goodness. Same. So I have a almost 3-year-old, and she actually had a speech delay. And so her screaming was very amplified. Oh my goodness. But sometimes kids are screaming because they're frustrated, right? Sometimes kids are screaming because they just want something. And what's happening a lot of the time is they scream and then it gets reinforced because we want the screaming to stop. And so we give them what they want, even though we haven't taken the time to teach them, okay, say this, da-da-da-da-da. And it's so hard. I mean, it's something that I'm constantly working on every single day with my daughter. But even this morning, she's been screaming a lot. She has not been sleeping in her bed. We just transitioned. It's been really, really rough. And so at the breakfast table, we were sitting there and just talking and, talking about what we're going to do today. Everyone's in a really good mood. And I'm like, hey, we're going to learn something new today. We're going to learn about snake breathing. And so everyone take a deep breath in and then go. And so we just practiced breathing over and over again, like 5 times. And they had so much fun with it. But I'm trying to like have fun ways for them to breathe so that when she's frustrated later, that's the main reason she screams.
Right.
When she's frustrated later, then I can remind her of something that we've already practiced proactively. So that I would say start with figuring out why they're doing it and then work on those skills proactively so that you can prompt it when those rough, big emotions come up.
I like that. And that's kind of using the art of distraction a little bit too.
Yeah.
By making it fun, you're taking their mind off it a little bit.
Yeah. That's how kids learn.
Yes. So for me personally, so when my son starts to scream, my natural reaction is to want to just yell. That's like me, to almost match it, But do you have any tips to what is the most beneficial thing to do if you are a parent when you're going through that sort of thing?
That's actually like a really important question, I think, because a lot of times we love our kids so much that we forget our own triggers and our own self-care. And so something that I recommend for parents to have less stress and like also better relationships with their kids is first, recognize your own sensory preferences, triggers, and needs, and figure out a way to teach yourself ways to prevent those, whatever. So for example, for me, I know my sensory preferences, like they're all pretty normal. For example, like I don't mind tags on my shirts. They're just everything's kind of normal except for sound. I have a really low sound threshold. So when screaming happens, even if it's happy screams, I get so overwhelmed. And so knowing that screaming is like my trigger, then I know if that starts to happen, that I have things that I can do. And so that I don't react, I can respond. So sometimes that's just realizing that it's triggering to me, take a deep breath and then respond. Sometimes it's like, okay, mom needs a break. Dad's going to do this because I don't want to freak out. I got like these like noise canceling headphones that sometimes I put in. If they're like playing really good, I'll just put those in. So I think it's important to know your own triggers and also communicate those with your kids. Like, so my 4-year-old, he knows that I hate screaming. I just hate it. But sometimes they like play on my reformer machine in here. And like if they let go of the rope, then they want to scream. And so he asked me, he's like, Mom, can I scream 2 times? And I'm like, okay. And then you're done. And then he tells his sister, he's like, okay, sissy, 2 times. And then we're done. So like having this conversation where they know, okay, that's really hard for mom is kind of it's an emotionally intelligent like culture that you're developing in your home because they have kind of this mutual respect, like, their triggers and now they know yours. And it's not so they can just push your buttons. It's so that everyone can be like, okay, this is hard for me. Let's figure out a different way. And so I would say that the biggest thing with reducing your stress is communicating and knowing your triggers and then having ways to deal with them.
So it's fair to say that communication is key going both ways if possible.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I feel like one of the... Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was going to move on. So keep going.
Oh, okay. Well, on that note, I was just going to say sometimes we do yell and I yell. Absolutely. I'm definitely not a perfect parent, but I think part of this like journey to help our kids develop social and emotional skills is realizing that it's okay for us to mess up, and we can model what the repair looks like when we mess up. So instead of pretending like mom didn't just freak out, you come back to and say, okay, I was feeling really stressed and I screamed and I'm sorry. What can we do differently so that, this doesn't happen again? Or you just kind of work it out with them, and it's teaching that skill to them at the same time as repairing your relationship.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I feel like one of the things that parents, one of their go-tos is a screen, right? Like if their kid is misbehaving or whatever it might be, is like, okay, here, take my phone, watch TV, whatever it is. What, from what you've seen, is the impact of screens on kids when it comes to behavioral issues?
Yeah, so that is something that I researched because my son is one of those kids who responds very, very dramatically when the screens go off. So we are not a screen-free home, but I have a lot of limits when it comes to screens because I've really researched what about screens is so difficult for kids. So first of all, iPads, tablets, phones, it's more stimulating for the kids because it's so close to their face. Interactive games is harder for kids to process than passive TV. So when I first started introducing screens to my son at like 2 or 2.5, I don't know. Anyways, I was like, oh, I don't really want him to just watch TV. So I'll have him play these interactive games. So he's like learning something about shapes and colors. But then I realized as I started researching more about it, that interactive screens is harder for kids' brains to process. And so they're in fight or flight mode the entire time they're doing these interactive screens. And passive screens is actually easier for their brains to process. And so I don't do a lot of interactive apps, games, anything like that, where like our intuition is like, yeah, this is educational. Let's put this in front of them.
Right.
But it's actually just a little bit more damaging to their brain. And not to say all kids react the same way, but for the kids who this is really overwhelming for, it can appear to be like a behavior disorder. If they have it, what is it called? The book is called Reset Your Child's Brain. And in there, it talks about this, like, they've created this diagnosis where it's like an emotional reaction to screens that actually is appearing as like oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD, all of these things, because it's just so hard for them to process. Anyway, so it's easier for kids to process passive screens. So that's one thing that's important to know. And then the second thing is when they come off the screens, there's just a lot of times for a lot of kids, there's not any emotional regulation skills that they're able to access at that time because they're just stuck in this emotional place of their brain. And so it's hard to be like, okay, no crying this time, or you're not going to do screens next time, because they can't, like, there's no possibility for them to not cry if they have this strong reaction. So it's just kind of important to know, because like my daughter, she could watch screens all day and I haven't tried it, but I could take her off and she'd be fine. But my son could watch screens for 5 minutes and sometimes has a really strong reaction. So you have to know like how your kids react. But definitely it's important to know just a few things about how the brain processes screens so that you know not to overuse them. And one rule that I kind of have for my household is we don't start the day with screens. We don't end the day with screens. And they don't get screens or tablets or personal pads or whatever at restaurants, waiting rooms, anything like that. And because we don't do that, I've never done that. They've never like had my phone at like the doctor or anything. Then they are bored. They're sometimes bored. And boredom leads to creative thinking and longer independent play. So it's actually super amazing to kind of see what happens when their minds can just freely think and figure it out.
I love that. Okay, so you're saying like watching TV is better for their brains than if you hand them a phone and they're interacting with an app or something like that.
Isn't that crazy?
That's less harmful in the brain. That is crazy.
And This is for like kids under 5. I haven't read a lot of the research later beyond that, but our first instinct is to be like, oh, learn your letters on this app.
Right.
But it's just not good for them.
Wow. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, but that's crazy. So I'm curious, when you were going through school, what was one of the things that you learned that surprised you about behavioral issues? Was there anything that you're like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought of that?
Well, honestly, the entire way I looked at behavior shifted. It was like a mind shift for me. So a lot of times, I don't even know where my brain was at before, but before I started really learning about behavior and this perspective, I would look at behavior as like annoying or disrespectful or like, wow, they're really manipulating me or whatever. But now I look at behavior as it's Ross Greene. Sometimes, I think he was in the conference last year. Mm-hmm. So Ross Greene has a quote that says, it's not that kids could, okay, hold on. I'm going to botch this and he's going to watch it. And I'm just joking. No, it's not that kids, basically, I won't quote it.
In a nutshell.
It's not that kids won't do something. They're not trying to defy you. It's that they can't do something. So they're actually missing the skills to be able to behave in the way that you would like them to do. And this makes sense because obviously their brains aren't even formed until like 25, fully formed 25, 27 for males, I think. Anyways, so there's so much that they just can't do. Even if they want to do it, they can't do it. And part of that is just like they can't get out of their frustration. They don't know how to communicate their needs, that kind of thing. And so understanding it from the perspective of what support do they need to be able to get their need met appropriately, it changed my life because you look at everybody so much differently. You're like, oh, it's not that they're trying to be like crazy person at the Starbucks line because they didn't get their order right. Something's going on in their life and they cannot get to a place of, politeness or whatever, because who knows why, So just understanding that there's a lot more going on than just defiance.
I love that. I feel like that makes you have a little more grace for other people and
for sure,
more importantly, your own kids. Yes. Sometimes it really does feel like, are you just trying to drive me insane? Because it's working. That's how I feel with my almost 2-year-old.
They are, I feel like.
They are. They're very good at that. At least my son is. But no, I think that's awesome. It makes you look at things differently and hopefully have a little more patience for everybody and for your kids as you try and figure out what's going on. So for you, it can be with something you read in a book or in school or some parenting advice you received from your mom or someone like that. But what was the best parenting advice you've ever received that you've implemented with your own children?
So my favorite quote, it's from Dr. Becky Bailey, is discipline is not something that we do to children. It's something we develop within them. And I love this perspective because we're not like raising kids to just control them, but we're trying to develop them into their own healthy humans. And so to understand discipline from this perspective helps you to really help them with the tools that they need to be able to get through difficult times and manage their frustrations and all of that.
I love that. So I've heard before, kind of along those same lines. So when you're trying to discipline your kid, instead of immediately putting them in timeout, try and talk to them and figure out what's going on. So if you are doing your best to try and figure out what's going on and they still are misbehaving, what advice do you have then?
Okay, so something that I use is called the safe place. So before I talk about the safe place, I kind of want to talk about just this like pattern of behavior. So when kids are just like, basically this morning at breakfast, we were in a green arrow moment. Everything was going really, really well. We're just having fun talking. That's a time I can teach. When my kids are starting to like play together and one kid sees something another could have, that's called the yellow arrow moment. It starts to escalate into this like curve. Okay. And then the child maybe takes the toy from the other kid. All of a sudden you've hit eruption mode. That's the red arrow moment. So you got this bell curve. And a lot of times we jump in the red arrow moment and we're like, okay, you give it back, you say what you don't like, we try to coach them through, and those are beautiful things to teach our children. We want to teach them conflict management. We want to tell them how to communicate their needs. But a lot of times our timing is off. So if they are completely have lost their minds, then we just cannot go in and teach. Okay. So then it goes back down the bell curve and it gets to the green arrow moment. And that's when we can teach. So in that red arrow moment, what I would suggest is to give everybody a break. There's nothing that says you have to address the conflict right when it happens. And a lot of times, because of just the way we've been raised, the way society is, people expect you to do something about that behavior right then, or you're not parenting or you're not disciplining. But what's hard about that is their brain, going back to the brain, their brain is in a place, an emotional state. Their amygdala is taking over. They're in fight or flight mode. So if you go to them with logic and say, okay, you need to say sorry, they're just going to say sorry to get past the moment. And it's not really going to sink in and teach them anything about empathy or communicating their needs. So you go to the safe place. They can feel any feeling they want to feel. And when they're ready to come out of their safe place, then that is when you say, okay, when you had this block or something, I'm using very juvenile, young examples, but when you had this block and Maylee wanted it, what could you say? You could say, I want the block, right? Okay, let's practice. You practice it and then you reintroduce them back into that scene or whatever. This works with so many things. Like, so if your kid is at the grocery store and they want something, what kid doesn't want like everything when you're at the store? Right. Anyways, when you're there and your child like sees something and says, I want that. And you're like, no, you can't have it. And then they're going to maybe start having a tantrum or something. It's not even with another child. They're just having a tantrum. And a lot of times we're going to go to them with logic and be like, we can't, mommy doesn't have money to buy that right now. Or and we try to explain it. That's more for our benefit than it is for them because they're just in an emotional place. And so in this situation, there's obviously not a place like a room that you can take them to sit down or whatever. But sometimes the safe place is just like how we respond to them to validate their feelings. So what I try to do is like, I know it's really hard when we can't have what we want. Do you need a hug? How can I help you feel this frustration? You recognize that the emotion's there. You don't try to dismiss the emotion because for them, it's like life or death. I wanted that candy bar. And if you need to, maybe, hug them. Or I've seen moms, like I was at the dollar store the other day and there was a mom just like sitting on the floor with her kid, like taking a minute. Aww. And that was like her safe place. I know. I wanted to be like, girl, you got this. This is awesome. Go, Mom. It's embarrassing sometimes to do that, but that is so appropriate to do sometimes, to kind of give them a moment to regroup and then keep going. So I think that a lot of times we go with the logic, but that break and that processing and that validation of emotions is so important.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I want to implement everything that you just said. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch everything and take notes. So when you talk about a safe space, do you call it that with your children? Do you say, let's go to your safe space? Or is this basically what you are calling it?
So what I call it when I teach it is the safe place. But in our home, I say, let's go take a break. Okay. And that's the words that I use. Some people call it time in, but time in can be confusing because sometimes there's rules tied to what a time in is. And I don't like the rigidity of rules because it's going to look different for every kid. So with a safe place, it's sometimes just talking through them and helping validate those emotions in the grocery cart. And sometimes it's actually physically taking them to the safe place. In my kids' rooms, I would say Maylee's is her rocking chair and Charlie's is his bed. But that's going to change and it's going to look different all of the time.
And do you go with them when this is happening, or do you say, okay, you need to sit here for a while and I'll come get you?
A really good question. So my son I've been doing this with my kids since my son was probably 18 months. And I would sit with him at that age. I would just sit with him and that would be his safe place. I was his safe place. As a mom who's home all the time, you kind of just are automatically the safe place.
Right.
But as he got older, then I would take him to the safe place and sit with him in there. So I'd like take him to his room or something like that, or the couch in the playroom or something. But then I would just start to be like, his outbursts got a little bit more physical where he'd like want to throw things, like just go everywhere. And like, I don't need to sit there for that. So I'd be like, oh, you're feeling really frustrated. Just feel everything you're feeling. And when you're ready, you can come on out. And that's the difference between timeout and like a safe place, is that I'm not putting him in there for a certain amount of time, but the choices his body's making is telling me, you need to take a break. Your body's telling me you need to take a break. You're making the choice with your body, whether you know it or not, subconsciously, to act like this. And so you're making the choice to take a break in your safe place. But also when your body's calm, you're making the choice to come out of your safe place. And what's cool about that is sometimes it takes seriously 20 seconds and he's able to regulate and come out. And sometimes he's in there for like 20 minutes and ends up falling asleep. And it's like, cool, that's what he needed, you know?
Right.
With my daughter, most of the time I go with her. She's like 2.5. But lately I've been like, you seem really sad. So the other night at dinner, she was screaming. Of course she was screaming. She was screaming about wanting to pour the milk, but the milk jug was completely full. And I'm not going to let my 2.5-year-old pour the milk jug. So I'll help you, independence. Anyway, so she starts screaming and I just picked her up and we went to her room and I rocked for a minute. I said, you're feeling really sad about the milk. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's okay. I can help you with the milk if you want, or you can just stand here and be sad if you want. And she's like, I want to go back. And I'm like, okay, you ready to go back and stop screaming? And she's like, yeah. So I brought her out and she was like happy. And she has like crocodile tears like on her face. But she's like so happy. But sometimes just removing them from that situation for a minute helps them to be like, okay, whoa, yeah, I was being a crazy, crazy woman. And now I'm ready to calm down.
Oh, I love that. I think that is so awesome. Because I feel like every little kid has something going on, right?
Yeah.
And not even little kid, even as they get older. And you mentioned, so is most of your study with younger children, or do you have any advice for parents of teenagers that have behavioral issues?
Yeah. So all of my examples are with younger children because I've worked just in a preschool. I mean, probably up to 8 is what I usually work with. And my own kids are under, that same age.
Right.
But you can use these same strategies with anybody you're having a relationship with: kids, parents, grandparents. So the first strategy is the green arrow moment. Don't try to go in and fix the conflict when everything's escalated. Come back to it when everyone's calm. So sometimes, especially with teenagers, they're going to be in the red arrow moment a lot. And a lot of that is hormones. They just can't even get back to that green arrow moment as easily. And so instead of trying to fight it, everyone just needs to take a break. So I would just be like, hey, I want to talk to you about this, but right now I'm feeling really frustrated. You seem like you're feeling really frustrated. Why don't we take a break and then we'll talk about this, or something like that. Can be really useful so that you're not like crashing and clashing and saying things that you regret. Because when we're angry, we're going to say things that are going to be more damaging to the relationship, and taking 5 minutes or like an hour to process those feelings and then come back is going to be a lot more effective.
I think that's such great advice, because even with my own spouse, my natural tendency is to be like, let's talk about it now. Like, let's do this right now. But that's not always what you should be doing when tensions are high. So I think that's really good advice with any relationship, and especially with your kids. So you obviously have so much knowledge about behavioral issues and everything. The title of our conference is Confessions of an Imperfect Mom. So has there been a time where you haven't necessarily followed your own advice, if you will, made some mistakes, but everything turned out okay? Do you have any examples like that?
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like I'm pretty transparent in that I'm definitely not a perfect parent. I I yell, just like I said before. I get overwhelmed. I cry. I'm like, okay, I'm done being a mom today. Your turn. You take them. And I think that it's important to realize that even though I have all of these skills as a behavior coach, I know what I should be doing. I have advice. If someone comes to me, I'll be like, oh, you could try this. That doesn't mean that's exactly where my brain goes in the moment of high stress situations, because I have my own emotions too to deal with. And so, like, for example, this week, as we're transitioning my child from a crib to a bed, it's not gone well at all. She used to sleep for 7 to 8 every day, every night, and then like 3-hour naps. So that's like amazing.
Oh, wow.
Then she felt really bad out of her crib. And so I'm like, okay, it's time to transition her. This is going to be fun. I wanted her to stay in her crib forever. And I started to transition her. And so I've been laying with her like 2 hours every day, and she like won't fall asleep. And so then I'm like, okay, I've already laid with you 2 hours, but like then 4 hours later, I got to lay with her again at like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. And then I'll lay there for like 2 to 3 hours. It's like the worst. And like the other night, my husband slept with her from 11 until 5 in the morning. Like, it's just been so bad. And I seriously, like, when she screams, instead of doing what I should be doing and like trying to encourage her to say the things, I'm just like, stop screaming. Anyway, so I was like losing it the other day, and I'm just like, I cannot keep doing this. Keep in mind, I'm 34 weeks pregnant at this point. Like, I feel like I'm going to die. I'm like, I cannot go off no sleep. I'm already going to be doing that soon. And after I put her down and she fell asleep, I was like, this is the best thing ever. I started to like, my head started to like reel, and I'm like, okay, what does she need? What is she trying to communicate? What is something that I can do that's consistent to help her to sleep in her bed? And I came downstairs and I told my husband, I'm like, I'm such a nerd because I like do like behavior coaching on myself. But I came down and I made like a chart with like choices. She really, really values her independence and really likes to be in control. But there's some things she can't control. And that's where the problem is like, I'm laying there and she'll be like, I want this. No, I want this. I want this. And keep changing her mind because she's a master negotiator. And so I decided that she can have some choices, but some things just need to be part of the routine. So I made this little chart that says, you can sleep in your bed or on the floor. I don't know why she wants to sleep on the floor, whatever. You know, you got to let go of some of your controls.
Yeah, it's true.
Light on or light off. She wants the light on, and door open or door closed. Like all of the things you would like expect for a kid to be able to fall asleep, she wants to do the opposite. So I'm like, okay, fine. You can have that independence. But our routine is prayer, song, sleep. You don't get to keep changing your mind. So you can make your choices, and then here's our routine. And we did it last night, and I put her to bed at 7. We did not get her out until this morning. And I'm like, hallelujah. So anyways, It's a process. It's hard. We have to try new things all of the time. And that's probably going to change in a week because she's going to figure it out. But I think that just knowing that it's okay to be an imperfect parent, your kids are still going to love you. Just always try to make that repair, and you'll be just fine.
Hearing your stories makes me feel a lot better about my 2-year-old. So thank you very much for that. All right. So Lauren, what would be your number one takeaway that you wanted moms to do as a result of this?
So I would say that usually I say stay curious about behavior, but I also want to put in there that all feelings are valid. And I think that's a really important concept to understand and start to figure out for ourselves. Like all of our feelings are valid. If we're feeling angry and frustrated, we need to recognize it's okay to feel this way. But then also our kids' feelings are valid. So instead of dismissing feelings as they come up, like a lot of times I feel like it's really easy for us to go, oh no, it's like, you're fine, be tough, get up, stop crying, you're good. You know, because we're uncomfortable with their emotions. So we're trying to make it go away. Right. But instead to really respond in a way that's like, it's okay to be sad. Do you need a break? Or you're feeling really scared. Sometimes I feel scared when this, and like relate to them, because then they're not shamed in their emotions and they can really feel validated. And that's going to help improve your relationship and improve behavior, because they're not going to amp up their behavior to try to communicate really what they're feeling. Like, no, mom, really, this is scary to me. So I'm going to freak out now.
Right.
Anyways, so I have a print that I sent with this thing. It's like a free mad chart or whatever. And if a child is having like really hard, strong emotions, then sometimes they have really strong, hard behaviors. And I'm not saying that because all feelings are valid, all behaviors related to that feeling are valid, but because all feelings are valid, there are some ways that you can express those feelings in appropriate ways. And so in this chart, it just has some ideas for what they can do when they're feeling frustrated or angry or mad. And so maybe that would be a place to start if you're having that. But just remember that all feelings are valid.
I love that. Thank you so much. Lauren Pace, author, health coach, and mom. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rich Christensen, and through the years of entrepreneurship and growing crazy businesses, I lost a view of what was really important. Through a series of really tender experiences, my mentor taught me you can replace anything in this world, but you cannot replace your family. So I made a dramatic pivot and started embedding deeply in my family some of the same principles that applied to business. My wife and I began very deliberately parenting. We looked for models, how not to mess our children up. There were really no good models to teach values, to entrench family unity, and to make sure that the values passed on in legacy to my children, and more importantly, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So like every great entrepreneur, I secretly created my own models. I was very hesitant to talk about it, but a few of my closest friends saw the impact that this was having on my children. I decided to take the processes that I used and create an online course so others could also work with their families to create tighter bonds, build confidence and self-esteem, while constructing a gorgeous legacy that they could live on past our lifetime. With this 5-part digital training series, you'll find the single most important lessons of thought leadership that I've ever created. There's 5 critical parts to this series, each with its very unique function. The first is symbols, creating unifying symbols that we all can touch to. Second is the doctrine, the guiding principles that we can tag and understand what the rules are. The third is the traditions or the rituals, where we actually formalize and we unite and show that we're unified with the values. The fourth, my favorite, the defining life events. The final section of this is the structure. What do the really wealthy families do to preserve their wealth and to pass on in the form of family banking? To pass on how you appropriately set up the will and how you embed your family constitution so that these values permeate and pass on. I can tell you firsthand that taking these steps to create a beautiful life for my family is the most important work that I've ever done and also the most rewarding. I would invite you to learn some of these principles, unify your family, bond them, and take some of the guesswork out of this. And I'm going to provide you the framework to make that happen with this 30 years of life experiences. So join me, get your membership to build family legacies today.